stake out the moral high ground without having to be idiotic in how they look at things. More generally, this was an unusually extreme case, but even in general, the Israelis are so much better armed that they end up killing considerably more civilians, even in situations which are not as extremely asymmetric as the Hezbollah case. And at the same time, the Israelis will more often be making some kind of an effort, at least to hold down the number of civilians they kill. So each side, neither side has to make idiots of itself to claim the moral high ground. There's the asymmetry of political power in Israel. Within Israel, there is a significant Arab minority. It is discriminated against. It is not treated as equal, not even very close to equal. The discrimination is blatant and substantial. And Israel is a democracy. And as a minority which is subject to discrimination in a democracy, the Israeli Arabs still have substantial political rights. It is real hard to find Arab countries in which the Arabs, as a ruling majority, give Arabs the kind of political rights that a discriminated against minority gets in a democracy. And you can go farther in being a political opponent of the Israeli government before you get shot or imprisoned as an Arab than you could go against the Egyptian government as an Egyptian Arab or against the Syrian government as a Syrian Arab, because dictatorships do not give political rights even to the majority, whereas democracies are entitled to give some political rights even to a minority subject to significant discrimination. And I can't really say, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Because there is no objective standard we can use to define the size of the container. Is 4 ounces of water a nearly full teacup, or a half full glass, or an almost empty stein? It is a morally complex situation, which is hard to reach a single evaluation of.
My name is Patricia Ann Abraham. I am an Arab American and Orthodox Christian. I have been to the Holy Land of Israel, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey rather extensively, and I have visited and worked with a women's cooperative in East Jerusalem. My most recent trip there was about 18 months ago. My first trip was in 2002, so I had the distinct pleasure of experiencing a lockdown for the first time in my life, because I was in Bethlehem when they brought Arafat's Alami, I believe is the pronunciation. And he wrote a book by the name of Israel at Crossroads. And in 2006, they did a presentation at the Tree of Life in Connecticut. And one of the things that he discussed was Israeli democracy. So, if I can figure out how to do this correctly.
Very often we read that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and very often the claim is that this kind of democratic regime creates an alliance or contributes to alliance with the US, etc., etc. However, when you read the Israeli media, there are never references to Israel as a democratic state. The references are always to Israel as Jewish and democratic. Because if you say that Israel is a democracy, or Israel should be a democratic state, this is a subversive idea. This is subversive speech. Because if you simply want Israel to be a democracy, this undermines very clearly the system that we have today, which effectively divides the population of Israeli citizens into two classes, Jewish and all others. Okay? So in Israel, in recent years, people have been talking about Israel as the state of all its citizens. This is considered anathema. And all attempts to have legal decisions recognize an Israeli nationality have failed. So in Israel we have this unique situation where you have Israeli citizens, but you don't have Israeli nationals, and you don't have an Israeli nationality. In the state of Israel, citizens are divided by nationality groups, and every individual carries an ID card, and the Interior Ministry, which issues these ID cards, keeps statistics along the lines of nationality and religion. So we have nationality groups such as Jewish, Arab, Italian, French, or whatever. Okay? There are no Israelis, okay? Because the state is defined as a state of the Jewish people, which means that Senator Joseph Lieberman is a shareholder in the state of Israel. He is part of the Jewish people. But Muhammad Bakri, who was born in Israel or Palestine and is a citizen, is not a shareholder. Okay? So the discussion in Israel is always about how Israel can be both Jewish and democratic, while it is very, very clear that if it's Jewish, it cannot be fully democratic. If it's democratic, it cannot be fully Jewish. And this is the real issue. So none of these things are ever mentioned in the New York Times. Okay? And I think that as time goes on, these taboos on open discussions are breaking down. And we have more and more exposure to things that are basically so common, because if you read Israeli newspapers, they are described very clearly and very directly and very bluntly every day. And as you may know, today on the internet you can read Israeli newspapers in English very easily. You can obtain access to the Israeli media, and there you can find all of these discussions, all of these debates. And in Israel, these things are never hidden. In the United States, they are. And I think that Israeli consciousness, if we can speak of a collective consciousness, is much more advanced than US consciousness, and we can understand why. Because if you live in Israel, you cannot avoid being aware of the injustice done to the Palestinians. It's impossible. Everybody talks about it, everybody knows that. It affects every aspect of life in Israel. And I think that within the next few years, one of the goals of all of us who want to promote peace and justice and a better life for both Israelis and Palestinians, one of our goals should be importing some of the Israeli collective consciousness to the United States. Thank you.